Hello, everyone. Happy Sunday. We're so happy to have you here this Sunday, April 28th. It so happens to also be the ninth day of the Festival of Rizwan, a beautiful celebration Baha'is are celebrating all around the world. We welcome you here, all of you here today for this beautiful presentation that we're about to embark on, our next part. We want to introduce Violetta. Violetta is an artist and graphic designer living in Pointe-Noire in the Republic of Congo. And she is the co-founder with Adib Masumian of the Utterance Project. Violetta is also a researcher, a writer, and a presenter on Baha'i history. She has given over 50 talks on the Clearwater Baha'is YouTube channel and is the author of 4 online chronologies, illustrated chronologies, on the lives of Baha'u'lláh, Abdul Baha, the Bab, and Shoghi Effendi. All links and details can be found in the description below in the video. With that being said, we thank Violetta for being here today. Welcome, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It's such an honor and a pleasure to be with you here on Zoom and Facebook and YouTube. Welcome, everyone. Today is such an exciting chapter in the Guardian's life. This is the first time that he's going to travel to Africa. He's going to cross the entire continent of Africa. Another major event in this part is how he renovates the Mansion of Bahjí, which was in the hands of the covenant breakers for 4 decades. So with that being said, I'm going to share my screen. There you go. Welcome to The Guardian, Part 8, 1927 to 1931, the Mansion of Bahjí. This part covers the life of Shoghi Effendi from the age of 30 in 1927 to the age of 34 in 1931. And we start with a difficult topic. October 1927 to June 1928, internal and external forces of opposition, Part 1. 17 October 1927, internal opposition. The Guardian finally, at long last, expels Avari. Avari had been a problem since the very beginning of the guardianship. He had sowed trouble in England and in Egypt, and he had come back to the Holy Land and planted doubt in people's minds. And then he'd gone to Iran and continued his meddling. After he returned to Persia, he worked as a teacher in high school for the rest of his life. He began writing letters to members of Abdul Baha's family saying that there had been a misunderstanding, and if Shoghi Effendi could arrange an annual income for him. But he never stopped working against the Guardian and started actively opposing the covenant of Baha'u'lláh. And Shoghi Effendi, the guardian of the faith of Baha'u'lláh, was obliged to protect the faith and formally expelled him on the 17th of October, 1927. He was now a covenant breaker and his life was shattered. His wife left him. Everybody abandoned him. He was separated from his only child. He became a Muslim. He wrote several letters of repentance to the Guardian, in which there was absolutely no indication of repentance. In the revolting history of covenant breaking, there would never be anyone as vile as Avari. Out of rage, he allied himself with the Muslims and the most fanatical Shia he could find. And begged for financial assistance from the government. He continued to attack the faith openly, but he didn't stop there. He revived malicious lies from the time of Abdul-Baha, and his full-time occupation was to oppose the faith. For years and years, he labored in vain, and he was a failure at everything, including covenant breaking. Thankfully, the last part of his story will be in 1953 when he finally passes away. And now we're going to revisit a friendship from childhood. Shoghi Effendi and Ali Yazdi are reunited after 8 years of separation. In this photograph, you see Ali Yazdi and his American wife, Marion Carpenter, who were married in Santa Paula, California. Marion Carpenter was an extraordinary woman. She was born in Michigan in 1912. She was the first Baha'i to attend the University of California at Berkeley and the first Baha'i to attend Stanford University. As a young girl during World War I, she had begged Abdul-Baha for permission to come on pilgrimage, but communications were cut off. When she started university in 1920, she wrote again requesting for permission, but Abdul-Baha replied that at the present, it is not possible. Then a year later, in August 1921, a very handsome young Persian man came to UC Berkeley. His name was Ali Yazdi, and Marion Carpenter could not get enough about his stories about Abdul-Baha, whom he had met countless times in his youth between 1910 and 1919. You remember Abdul-Baha wrote him letters of recommendation, both for Germany and America, and he was such a close friend of the Guardian. But of course, the Guardian, when Shoghi Effendi became the Guardian, it would have been difficult for him to maintain such a close friendship, because he had a responsibility as the head of the faith. But he never stopped caring deeply for Ali Yazdi. The last time they'd met, they were about 23, 24, and Ali Yazdi had gone to visit him at Oxford University. 7 years later, Ali Yazdi had become a civil engineer, and he came on pilgrimage with his wife in 1928. We don't have very many details about the pilgrimage, but we know at least that Ali Yazdi and his childhood friend Shoghi Effendi were able to meet once again. In this chronology, I will pay homage to the hands of the cause appointed by Shoghi Effendi and those appointed by Abdul-Baha when they pass. And just before July 1928, the apostle of Baha'u'lláh, hand of the cause, and first representative of Huququllah, hand of the cause, Haji Amin, passed away. We don't know the date exactly of his passing, but he died in 1928. And he was the first Baha'i to come on pilgrimage to the Holy Land when Abdul-Baha had just arrived in the Mosque prison and bring back news to Persia of Baha'u'llah's whereabouts. Because at the time in Persia, the rumor was that Baha'u'llah had drowned. So the Baha'is did not know if he was alive. And Haji Amin was the first one to say, I have seen him in person. He is in the Holy Land. He had been imprisoned in 1891 with the hand of the cause, Haji Akund, and there is that very iconic picture of them both with their jailer standing above them and then on their knees on the ground with heavy chains around their neck. But that picture only showed calm and fortitude. He was the one who brought a loaf of bread and an apple to Abdul-Baha in London. He had missed his boat because he only spoke Persian. He finally arrived in London and with contributions from Huququllah, from Iran and from Central Asia. And one of the Huququllah contributions was a piece of bread and an apple from a worker in Turkmenistan. And when Abdul-Baha saw what was in his hand, he said, what is in that handkerchief? And he opened it. He pushed away his lunch plate and he shared the apple and broke off pieces of the bread and asked all of those around him to eat with me of this gift of humble love. He was 92 when he passed away, and Shoghi Effendi elevated him posthumously to the rank of Hand of the Cause in an untranslated letter in Persian, which Adib Masumian provisionally translated for this chronology. And I want to just read to you the beginning of this, because this is the first time this exists in English. The shocking news of the ascension of the Honorable Amin-i Ilahi to the Abha kingdom was the cause of immeasurable sorrow and regret. For many successive years, that distinguished individual, that noble soul, was intimately engaged in service to the sacred threshold with an astonishing love and devotion. The full letter is on the chronology. You will receive an email with the link, which you can go to and read the entire thing. On the 22nd of June, 1928, this time external opposition, as opposed to Avari's internal opposition, the Soviet Union seizes the house of worship in Ashgabat. This was the first house of worship in the Baha'i world. And by 1928, there were several local spiritual assemblies in Ashgabat, Moscow, and other cities of the Soviet Union. But 1928 was when the Soviet Union was on its second anti-religious campaign, following one that began 7 years earlier in 1921. And it wanted to replace religion with agnosticism and atheism with a materialist worldview. And until 1928, the Bolsheviks had allowed the Baha'is to carry their community activities. But then starting in 1928, the Baha'i community came under increasing pressure and open persecution. On the 22nd of June, 1928, Shoghi Effendi received a cable from the Ashgabat Assembly saying, in accordance, General Agreement 1917, Soviet government has nationalized all temples, supplicating guidance. The Guardian took immediate action and cabled the Moscow Assembly to intercede with the Soviet authorities. But in a long letter on the 1st of January, 1929, Shoghi Effendi explained that the Russian Baha'is had been brought under the rigid application of the principles already enunciated by the state authorities. And so, shortly after the 22nd of June, 1928, the Soviet Union expropriated the house of worship, suspended Baha'i meetings, suppressed Baha'i communities, assemblies, prohibited fundraising, required frequent inspections of their meetings, and strict censorship of their correspondence, and deported leading Baha'is and well-known Baha'i speakers and assembly officers. This is a poster, Soviet poster, promoting their anti-religious campaign, during which the house of Ashgabat was seized. The poster reads, "Religion slows the 5-year plan, down with religious holidays." Shoghi Effendi spoke about this expropriation and said that the Baha'is had exhausted all possible avenues, and that the measures of the state, he qualified them as the free exercise of their legitimate rights. That is how he analyzed the situation. And this is a very interesting application of Baha'u'llah's principle of obedience to government. Instead of speaking out of turn about the Soviet decision, the Guardian explained they are within their legitimate rights to do this. But a few months later, in September 1928, confiding in Martha Root, Shoghi Effendi shared with her his feelings about this. "It has been a very depressing summer this year for me, as the condition of the cause in Russia is going from bad to worse." the Mashrikul Asghar has been appropriated by the state, closed and sealed. A large sum of money is required if the friends wanted to rent it. Otherwise, they're threatened to be sold to other parties. Meetings are suspended. Assemblies are dissolved. One thing the Guardian did not approve of was the return of Russian Baha'is to Persia. He said that it would be exceedingly harmful if the Friends in Ishkabad returned to Persia. One of the consistent themes in the Guardian's life was his love of pioneers and his extreme sadness at pioneers leaving their posts. A few months later, on 6 December 1928, we have a short story on the Guardian's attachment to the Baha'i world. All of the volumes of the Baha'i world are available online, and I really encourage you to peruse them at random, any of them that were published by Shoghi Effendi, because he took such an active interest in publishing them. He chose the pictures himself, chose the stories. He even wrote articles. And he would say to people, even people who were not a Baha'i in this case, I would strongly advise you to procure a copy of the Baha'i Yearbook, which will give you a clear and authoritative statement of purpose, of the purpose, the claim, and the influence of the faith. He wrote a long letter on the 6th of December, 1928, devoted in its entirety to the importance of the Baha'i world. It's a few paragraphs. I'm only going to read the beginning. This unique record of worldwide Baha'i activity attempts to present to the general public, as well as to the student and scholar, those historical facts and fundamental principles that constitute the distinguishing features of the message of Baha'u'lláh for this day. In the remainder of the letter, Shoghi Effendi calls the Baha'i world eminently readable, attractive, reliable, authoritative, up-to-date, accurate, comprehensive, concise, persuasive, thoroughly illustrated, unexcelled, and unapproached by any publication, and capable of arousing unprecedented interest in the faith among all strata of society. December 1928 to 1929, internal and external opposition to the forces of opposition, part 2. On the 13th of December, 1928, there is a full-scale investigation of the Baha'i faith in Turkey. I would be remiss in not thanking Dr. Nejati Alkan, the foremost historian and expert on the Baha'i faith in the Ottoman Empire. This section was a collaboration with him. This first image here is from a French journal, Le Petit Journal Illustré, from the 16th of March, 1924, which shows one of Ataturk's many reforms, the abolition of the caliphate. We have two pictures here that were provided by Dr. Nejati Alkan. On the left is a photograph of Nuri Sadiq Bey, the chairman of the local spiritual assembly of Istanbul, while he was defending the faith in court. On the right is a front page article from the Istanbul newspaper Milliyet, dated 9th of December, and it's about Queen Marie of Romania. And the title reads, "The trial began, what is Baha'ism supposed to be? Yesterday, those who set up a secret organization were tried." Now, in the bottom, this is also a photograph provided by Dr. Alkan. This is a photograph of the 7 members of the local spiritual assembly of Istanbul, taken on the 9th of October, 1928, the day that they were arrested. So just a tiny bit of historical background. After the Young Turk Revolution in 1908, that very revolution that finally freed Abdul-Baha from 40 years of being an Ottoman prisoner. After the Young Turk Revolution, the Ottoman Empire lost during World War I after 1918, and it fell apart. And the Republic of Turkey was proclaimed in 1923, followed by a very intense period of secularization, sort of like what was happening in Russia. They wanted to separate Islam and state affairs, and they had wide-ranging civil reforms, which included removing Islam as the state religion and adopting the Latin alphabet for writing Turkish. It came to the attention of the Turkish government that some religious groups had provided cover for political activities, and they discovered that the Baha'i faith was an organized religion and that they were actively teaching and propagating. So they became suspicious of Baha'is. So what they did was they searched the homes of Baha'is in Izmir and Istanbul. They seized all the literature they could find. They questioned the believers. They sent a number of Baha'is to prison. And some of the literature confiscated were tributes by the Queen of Romania to the Baha'i faith, those public tributes we looked at last week, and her letter to Baha'is of Istanbul. This case made news all over Europe, and the Turkish press had sympathy for the Baha'i community. So there was a great deal of publicity, and the case reached the criminal tribunal on the 13th of December. The tribunal was a great step in the unfoldment of Baha'u'llah's cause. As Shoghi Effendi stated, never before in Baha'i history have the followers of Baha'u'lláh been called upon by the officials of his state to unfold the history and principles of their faith. This is another example of the infallibility of the Guardian in analyzing anything having to do with the Baha'i faith and Baha'i scriptures and the role of Baha'i, the place of the Baha'i faith in current day history. He saw it kind of like the annulled marriages in Baba, Egypt, as a victory. Even though Baha'is were in prison, Baha'is had to explain their faith publicly, and this publicity would serve to sort of sit the faith as an independent religion, clear up misunderstandings publicly in court. The effects of the case were very, very significant, and the Guardian presented the historic verdict to the Baha'is of the West in a letter dated the 12th of February, 1929, as to the verdict of the case of the Baha'is in Istanbul. It stated clearly that although the followers of Baha'u'lláh in their innocent conception of the spiritual character of their faith found it unnecessary to apply for leave for the conduct of their administrative activities, they were made liable for a fee because they didn't ask for permission to meet. That's what the Guardian is talking about. Yet they have, to the satisfaction of the legal representatives of the state, not only established the inculpability of the cause of Baha'u'lláh, but worthily acquitted themselves of the task of vindicating its independence, its divine origin, and its suitability to the circumstances and requirements of the present age. This is the genius of the interpretation of the Guardian. And so now we're going to meet a great enemy of the Guardian, an American woman named Ruth White. 31 December 1928, internal opposition. Ruth White questions the authenticity of the will and testament of Abdul-Baha. The will and testament of Abdul-Baha was authentic, so authentic, in fact, that the most vile covenant breaker of all, Avari, never questioned its authenticity because it was written in Abdul-Baha's very distinctive handwriting. It had his signatures and his seals. No one questioned it except this American woman, Ruth White, the most notorious American covenant breaker, who threw herself into a total lunacy. She wrote countless letters to NSAs everywhere, objecting to the directives of Shoghi Effendi, calling into question the authenticity of the will and testament. She spread the falsehood that Shoghi Effendi was not the successor of Abdul Baha. And on the 27th of February, 1929, The Guardian responded to a letter from the National Spiritual Assembly of the United States and Canada and said, I have, in a letter addressed to the National Spiritual Assembly, set forth my views regarding the contents of Ruth White's Palestine authorities and have no reason to believe that they will consider it worthy of their consideration. Ruth White will come up again. She is never going to let go, but this is just an introduction to who she was and what she was peddling. Now we come to a very exciting section because this is the first major letter of Shoghi Effendi's ministry. It's called Bahá'í Administration, Selected Messages, and it was written in 1928. You have the cover and the first few pages. Bahá'í Administration is a compilation. It was the very first compilation that Shoghi Effendi did of his own letters between 1922 and 1928, and then it was revised until 1932. The first letter included in Bahá'í Administration was 2 months after the passing of Abdul Baha. Shoghi Effendi expresses his deep sorrow at the passing of the master, and the last letter in the compilation is from 1932 or 1933, and discusses various considerations regarding the delicate issue of removing voting rights. So Bahá'í Administration is very concerned with how to administer the faith coherently, cohesively, in a united way throughout the entire world, which is from the beginning of Shoghi Effendi's ministry. One of the things he's going to devote the most amount of time to is building Bahá'í Administration. And that is why this compilation is so important, because it would be a resource for isolated communities to manage their communities. And it was meant to be something that people could deepen on. I want to just, for the rest of this chronology, when I present long letters by The Guardian, I'm always going to share with you a very eloquent excerpt. This majestic excerpt from Bahá'í Administration is from a letter dated the 24th of September, 1924, and it's from a section in that letter that was titled Our Inner Life. And it exemplifies The Guardian's writings at its best, as it calls Baha'is to momentous feats of heroism. Humanity, though suffering and turmoil, is swiftly moving on towards its destiny. If we be loiterers, if we fail to play our part, surely others will be called upon to take up our task as ministers to the crying needs of this afflicted world, not by the force of numbers, not by the mere exposition of a set of new and noble principles, not by an organized campaign of teaching, no matter how worldwide and elaborate in its character, not even by the staunchness of our faith and the exaltation of our enthusiasm, can we ultimately hope to vindicate in the eyes of a critical and skeptical age the supreme claim of the Abha revelation. One thing, and only one thing, will unfailingly and alone secure the undoubted triumph of the sacred cause, namely, the extent to which our own inner life and private character show forth in their manifold aspects the splendor of those eternal principles proclaimed by Baha'u'lláh. The Baha'is now have The Guardian to create a personal relationship between them and the covenant, between their inner lives and the progress of the faith. This is the type of guidance they're going to get for the next 30 years. 1928, 1929, another external opposition and again, a subject we've revisited for the last 4 parts, the House of Baha'u'lláh in Baghdad. Shoghi Effendi never gave up, and he never rested until the case of the Most Great House was brought before the League of Nations, the ancestor to the United Nations. On the 11th of September, 1928, a petition was submitted to the League of Nations to return the House of Baha'u'lláh to the Baha'is. So between the 26th of October and the 13th of November, the case of the Most Great House of Baha'u'lláh in Baghdad was taken before the 14th session of the Permanent Mandates Commission. This is the Permanent Mandates Commission of 1924. These are the people who heard the case. And the British government issued a memorandum saying that the Shia had no conceivable claim whatsoever to the House of Baha'u'lláh. Shoghi Effendi was very wise and asked the Baha'is not to give the victory publicity, asked them to be very cautious. So the Council of the League of Nations adopted the conclusion reached by the Mandates Commission, but the next month, King Faisal of Iraq caved under the pressure of the Shia, who threatened to cause unrest in the country. And the Most Great House was not returned to the Baha'is. But this case is far from resolved. We're going to revisit it again. We come now to another letter, another major letter from the Guardian. February 1929 to May 1929, the World Order of Baha'u'lláh. The World Order of Baha'u'lláh and the World Order of Baha'u'lláh Further Considerations were written on the 27th of February, 1929, and on the 21st of March, 1930. This was in the middle of the Great Depression, exactly at the same time as the Great Depression was ravaging America and the world economy. This is when Shoghi Effendi published 2 important compilations of letters addressed to the Baha'is of the United States and Canada and Western countries. In those dark hours of economic chaos that was disrupting the foundations of the old world order, Shoghi Effendi provided direction, comfort, clarity of vision to the Baha'is by writing the World Order of Baha'u'lláh, because the Baha'is were living under a crumbling old world order. And the aim of these 2 compilations was to clarify the meaning and purpose of the Baha'i faith, its beliefs, its implications, its destiny, and its future, in order to guide the Baha'i communities of North America and the Western Hemisphere to better understand their duties and privileges and their own destiny, while the Guardian continued to build Baha'u'llah's administrative order. Major, important compilations at a very confusing time in world history. In the World Order of Baha'u'lláh, Shoghi Effendi draws a connection between the Kitáb-i-Iqán, the most holy book in the Book of Laws, and the will and testament of Abdul-Baha. He says that together, these 2 books constitute the chief depository wherein are enshrined those priceless elements of divine civilization, the establishment of which is the primary mission of the Baha'i faith. He states further that the Kitáb-i-Iqán and the Will and Testament of Abdul-Baha had the same purpose, that they both had identical provisions for successorship. Baha'u'lláh naming Abdul-Baha his successor, Abdul-Baha explicitly naming Shoghi Effendi as his successor. Also, number 4, the will and testament, in the guardian's own words, confirms the provisions of the Aqdas. 5, he also says that the will and testament supplements these same provisions. Supplements is the word used by the guardian. In the same sentence, the guardian states that Abdu'l-Bahá's will and testaments correlates the provisions of the Aqdas. And lastly, the 7th point that Shoghi Effendi makes is that the will and testament of Abdu'l-Bahá and the Kitáb-i-Iqán are inseparable parts of one complete unit. Major pronouncements. I just want to read a short excerpt from the World Order of Bahá'u'lláh. As I told you, I always want to give you the ringing English of the guardian spoken out loud, because he wrote everything out loud. He meant for his words to be read out loud. This is a photo montage of all the world leaders I could find in 1930, because he refers to them in the World Order of Bahá'u'lláh. I'm only going to read a short excerpt. Leaders of religions, exponent of political theories, governors of human institutions who at present are witnessing with perplexity and dismay the bankruptcy of their ideas and the disintegration of their handiwork, would do well to turn their gaze to the revelation of Baha'u'lláh and to meditate upon the world order, which lying enshrined in his teachings is slowly and imperceptibly rising amid the welter and chaos of present-day civilization. The confidence, the absoluteness of the statements of the guardian about the world order of Baha'u'lláh, those are words that must have been like balm to the aching hearts of Baha'is living in such confusing times. The excerpt is quite long. Again, you can see it on the website. This is a really short story, but it's a famous one, and I wanted to put it in the chronology because a lot of people have heard it, but people maybe don't know where it came from. There are very famous 5 steps for prayer and meditation that the guardian outlined, and I want to tell you the story of where they came from. This is Ruth Moffat, and she is the one to whom the guardian gave these instructions. There are pilgrim notes, of course. So as with all pilgrim notes, they are not considered Shoghi Effendi's authoritative writings. Only his letters are authoritative, but she was a very devoted Baha'i, and the steps really do sound like something Shoghi Effendi would have advised. So the first step in prayer and meditation, according to Shoghi Effendi, as he was speaking to Ruth Moffat, was pray and meditate. Use the prayers of the manifestations of God. They have the greatest power. Then remain in silence and contemplation for a few minutes. Step 2, arrive at a decision and hold it. This decision is usually born during the contemplation. It might seem impossible, but immediately take the next step. Step 3, have the determination to carry the decision through. Budding into determination, many fail here because their determination is blighted instead of being reinforced. And then their determination just becomes a wish and a longing. And this is where most people fail at step 3. Step 4, have faith and confidence that the power will flow through you. The right way will appear. The door will open. For the right thought, the right message, the right principle, right book will be given to you. Then as you arise from prayer, take at once the 5th step. Then the guardian said, lastly, act. Act as though it had been answered. Act with tireless, ceaseless energy. And as you act, you yourself will become a magnet, which will attract more power to your being until you become an unobstructed channel for the divine power. Then the Shoghi Effendi told Ruth Moffat something interesting. He said that some people pray, but don't meditate. Some people meditate and arrive at a decision, but then they don't hold it. Some go with the decision, but they don't have the determination to carry it through. But how many people get to the last step where they act as if it had been answered? Between 1929 and 1957, this extraordinary man, the talented Horace Hawley, Secretary of the National Spiritual Assembly of the United States of Canada from 1925 to 1959, except for a brief period, he was a well-known poet, essayist, playwright, businessman, and thinker. He played a pivotal role in the development of the administrative order in the United States. And when you go to Baha'i Reference Library, or when you open any of Shoghi Effendi's books, from Advent of Divine Justice, The Golden Age of the Cause of Baha'u'lláh, The Goal of a New World Order, The Unfoldment of World Civilization, The Promised Day is Come, Messages to the Baha'i World, 1950 to 1957, even The World Order of Bahá'u'lláh, all those little titles that you see in bold, they were not written by the Guardian. They were added with the Guardian's permission by Horace Hawley. Even in the dispensation of Baha'u'lláh, he put all the little titles, the subtitles for the sections, in all of the Guardian's writings from 1929 to 1957. May to December 1929, full recognition of the Baha'i faith in Palestine. In the Holy Land, the Baha'is already had a Baha'i cemetery. They were already burying the deceased facing the Qibla, the shrine of Baha'u'lláh, which you see here. And the Baha'i community had stopped referring to an Islamic court for all questions of marriages, divorce, rights of burial. But it was time to make things official. On the 4th of May, 1929, Shoghi Effendi presented a formal petition from the representatives of the Baha'i community in Haifa to the government of British Mandate Palestine, requesting permission for the Baha'i community to administer the affairs of their community according to Baha'i law in matters of civil law, which means marriage, divorce, burial laws, pending a uniform code of civil law in Palestine. At the time, there wasn't a uniform code. Every sort of religious community administered their own thing. And they asked for full powers to manage their own affairs. The petition was granted, and the Baha'i faith received official recognition by civil authorities. The Baha'i faith was now on equal footing with Jewish, Muslim, and Christian communities in Palestine, and Shoghi Effendi hailed the decision as an act of tremendous significance and wholly unprecedented in the history of the faith in any country. 1929, an Indian Baha'i brushes a portrait of Shoghi Effendi. This is our young guardian. In 1929, an Indian Baha'i pilgrim described Shoghi Effendi brilliantly, especially in one characteristic of Shoghi Effendi, the various intensities of his energy and speed. It's very, very brief, but I loved it so much I wanted to put it in. It just gives us an understanding of the immense dynamic strength of the Guardian. And this is what he says. It's just 3 lines. We must understand Shoghi Effendi in order to be able to help him accomplish the stupendous task he has entrusted to us. He is so calm and yet so vibrant, so static and yet so dynamic. I know, you are not big fans of these covenant breaker things, but Let me tell you, they're very important because Shoghi Effendi had to deal with them, so we should deal with them as well. 1929, Ahmad Sohrab's New History Society and his path to covenant breaking. Oh, sorry. So Ahmad Sohrab had been Abdu'l-Bahá's secretary for many, many years. He wrote a diary that is very, very well known, where we get a lot of wonderful stories from Abdu'l-Bahá's childhood and Abdu'l-Bahá's sayings. And he had traveled with Abdu'l-Bahá to all through Europe in 1913 and Egypt, and he stayed in the Holy Land during the war, and he wrote this diary for 6 years nonstop every day. But he began opposing the faith, and by doing so, he revealed who he had always been. He was very prominent. There was a lot of recognition attached to Ahmad Sohrab because he had written letters to the Baha'i community for basically 7 years nonstop, almost daily letters, telling them what Abdu'l-Bahá was doing. So he was sort of a household name for Baha'is in the 30s. And as the Guardian began building up the administrative orders, guiding communities to elect local spiritual assemblies, national spiritual assemblies, committees, strengthening these nascent institutions, Ahmad Sohrab rose up against the direction the Guardian was taking the faith in. He allied himself with a very wealthy woman named Julie Chandler, and they started an organization called the New History Society, making a lot of noise, drumming up a lot of publicity to recruit members, and they wanted to spread Baha'i teachings to their own advantage, simultaneously attacking the Guardian's building up of the administrative order. What Ahmad Sohrab did, in effect, is create a sect of the Baha'i faith and plagiarized the words of Baha'u'lláh. He was very, very strange. I mean, he loved Abdu'l-Bahá, and he never questioned the authenticity of the will and testament. But he didn't like the Guardian, and he criticized him in all of his decisions. So of course, Ahmad Sohrab, as with many, many covenant breakers, was deeply unsuccessful in all of his covenant breaking activities and all of his attacks against the faith. And during a period of intensity in Ahmad Sohrab's activities, the Guardian wrote a letter saying, in regard to the activities of Ahmad Sohrab, Shoghi Effendi has already stated that such attacks, however perfidious, do not justify the Friends replying or taking any direct action against them. The NSA should ignore them entirely, which was brilliant advice. Do not pay attention, do not reply, do not respond, do not react. And most of these attacks just died away. They died of their own natural death because they were so uninteresting to begin with. 12th of December, 1929, the Baha'i world is not ready for an international Baha'i secretariat. The Guardian would, for the next 20 years, would slowly mature an idea of an international Baha'i secretariat that would be a preliminary stage to the Universal House of Justice. This would come into being in 1951 as the International Baha'i Council. But he was already thinking about it in the 1930s, but the time was not ripe. So he had to explain to Baha'is that I am actually considering ways and means for the formation of some efficient, competent secretariat in Haifa. I've thought about it a great deal, and I am exploring and searching for a competent, reliable, methodical, and trained associate. When this is achieved, I cherish the brightest hopes for the strengthening of the vital bonds that bind the center of the faith in Haifa with the assemblies of the world. That person would be Leroy Iowes. And he would not come into the Guardian's life for another 20 years. And then it would be time. And then this secretariat, which the idea had slowly matured in Shoghi Effendi's mind and understanding, would see the light of day. Now we come to my favorite part, my second favorite part of this entire chapter in Shoghi Effendi's life. Summer to October 1929, Shoghi Effendi crosses Africa from Cape Town to Cairo. So I made a little map. That's literally my favorite thing to do. So all of these little dots are very much symbolic because obviously I do not know exactly how the Guardian went from point A to point B, but we see his stops. He traveled from Southampton, which is not on the map, stopped in an island here in Madeira, which I'm going to talk about in a little bit. And he arrived in Cape Town. And he went through South Africa, probably stopping in Johannesburg. Then he went to Zimbabwe and Zambia, which is Rhodesia. And he drove by car through East Africa, then probably up the Nile by boat to Cairo, and then by train to Haifa. And this he did alone. It was a solo journey. Shoghi Effendi left Haifa for Europe in the summer of 1929. We do not know if he first stopped in Switzerland, although it would be entirely possible. It was the Guardian's adventurous spirit, that same love for scenic beauty that had attracted him so many times to the Bernese Alps of Switzerland, but also the deep jungles of Africa that took him to the continent for his first great journey across Africa. Shoghi Effendi sailed to Cape Town, Africa from Southampton in September 1929. Although he really, really wanted to visit the Belgian Congo here in green, he was not at the time able to obtain a visa for the Belgian Congo. So he had to instead travel north to Rhodesia and then through East Africa to go back to Anglo-Egyptian Sudan and Egypt. When he went through what is today Zimbabwe, he stopped at Matopo Hills. It was south of Victoria Falls, and he visited the grave of Cecil Rhodes. Then he went and he visited Victoria Falls and took pictures. Then he traveled through East Africa with an English big game hunter in a car. And he rode a ferry through the Nile across a papyrus swamp. And he arrived back in Haifa in October of 1929. All of the known photographs of Shoghi Effendi's 1929 cross-Africa trip are now here in chronological order of his journey. Here you see Shoghi Effendi, aged 32, dressed in white with a colonial hat, at the grave of Cecil Rhodes in Matopo Hills. Cecil Rhodes was an English colonialist. He was a mining magnate. He was a politician in South Africa. He served as Prime Minister of the Cape Colony. He founded Southern and Northern Rhodesia, giving them his name, Cecil Rhodes, Rhodesia, which are now known as Zimbabwe and Zambia. He devoted a great deal of effort in building a railway from Cape Town to Cairo, which never was finished. And he also instituted a very famous scholarship called the Rhodes Scholarship. Cecil Rhodes was buried at Matopo Hills near Bulawayo, Zimbabwe. And it was 400 kilometers southeast of Victoria Falls, Shoghi Effendi's next destination. You can see all these pictures in this wonderful book called The Guardian of the Baha'i Faith, written by Amatul Bahariya Khanum. This is a photograph the Guardian took of Victoria Falls. It's a beautiful photograph. It shows one of the world's greatest waterfalls. And this is just a photograph of a baobab tree. And it was taken very close to Victoria Falls, also taken by The Guardian. This is a photograph of men pulling the ferry through a papyrus swamp on the Nile River. And this photograph, taken also by Shoghi Effendi, is a photograph of the car in which he rode 800 kilometers with an English hunter across part of East Africa. This is not a photograph that was taken in Africa. It was accidentally labeled as an African village, but it's not. I will let you know when I find out where it is. I've sent out several inquiries to several archives departments. 1930, the first International Baha'i Archives. Abdul-Baha had completed 5 rooms in this original Shrine of the Bab, and there were 6 rooms. He had completed 6 rooms in the Shrine of the Bab, but the building was originally designed to have 9 rooms. And so Shoghi Effendi began building the last 3 rooms on the 14th of February, 1929, and completed them in 1930. He personally supervised the construction work, and he turned these new rooms into the very first International Archives building. These absolutely beautiful high-resolution photographs that you see here were given to me for use in this chronology by the United States National Baha'i Archives, and they show the first Baha'i archives in the history of our faith. Among the items that the pilgrims could marvel at were portraits of the Bab and Baha'u'lláh, the hair and garments of the Bab, Baha'u'llah's pen case, his garments, his headdresses, his kashkul, his alms bowl from his 2 years in Sulaymaniyeh in Kurdistan, manuscripts of tablets, illuminated tablets, the bloodstained garment of the purest branch, the ring of Qudus, and the sword of Mullah Hussein. In February to May 1930, the Kitáb-i-Iqán. But first, the 19 apostles of Baha'u'lláh and the 19 disciples of Abdul-Baha. This is something that Shoghi Effendi came up with. He wanted to honor 19 stellar individuals from the ministry of Abdul-Baha and the ministry of Shoghi Effendi. So the apostles of Baha'u'lláh were all Iranian men. And they were eminent Baha'is who'd rendered distinguished services to the cause. The 19 disciples of Abdul-Baha were all Westerners and included men and women. And these are the 19 apostles of Baha'u'lláh. I will just tell you the most famous ones. Of course, number 1 is Mirza Musa, the brother of Baha'u'lláh. Number 2 is Badi, the 17-year-old who was martyred after bringing the letter to the Shah. Haji Amin, who just passed away in 1928, the first trustee of the Huququllah. Mirza Abul Fazl, the greatest scholar of Baha'i writings. Let me see. This, of course, is Nabili Azam. And Zainul Mugharabin is 18, famous calligrapher and a doctor of Islamic law. You can go to the website, and they are numbered. I put nice numbers in my little graphic, and I gave tiny little biographies for each of them, and you can get to know them. The 19 disciples of Abdul-Baha are, of course, we recognize John S. Lamont here. Number 2 is Thornton Chase, the first American Baha'i. Number 5 is Hippolyte Dreyfus, who's an author, translator, and international promoter of the faith. Number 7 is Robert Turner, the first African-American Baha'i. Number 10 is Lua Getzinger. Number 15 is Ethel Rosenberg, the first English Baha'i. And I have also done the same thing for them. You can see all their biographies, very short biographies, on the website. Now we're going to talk a little bit about our beloved Queen Marie. February to the 26th of March, 1930, Shoghi Effendi and the Greatest Holy Leaf prepare for the visit of Queen Marie of Romania. The ship you see here is called the Dacia. It's the Imperial Romanian ship on which Queen Marie of Romania sailed to Egypt and to the Holy Land, but was unable to visit Shoghi Effendi and the Greatest Holy Leaf. Queen Marie of Romania and her daughter Ileana left Romania on the Dacia and traveled from Istanbul to Athens, arriving in Alexandria, Egypt in February 1930. Both Shoghi Effendi and Bahia Hanum were anxiously awaiting Queen Marie's visit in March of 1930, and Shoghi Effendi began making preparations. He wired the Baha'is in Egypt and asked them to only convey written expressions of welcome. Don't go and meet the Queen, just stay with correspondence and welcome her on behalf of the Baha'is. The Guardian prepared a priceless gift. He had asked the Baha'is of Persia to reproduce Baha'u'llah's tablet to Queen Victoria, Queen Marie's own grandmother, in the finest calligraphy, illuminate the tablet, and send it to the Holy Land by March 10th. Shoghi Effendi had not heard from Queen Marie at all, so he sent a cable on the 8th of March, extending a heartfelt invitation on behalf of Abdul Baha's family to the Queen, and he said, "Your Majesty's acceptance to visit Baha'u'llah's shrine in the prison city of Akka will, apart from its historic significance, be a source of immeasurable strength, joy, and hope to the silent sufferers of the faith through the Middle East." There was no reply. 30th of March, 1930, the missed visit of Queen Marie. I made a little painting, a sad painting here, which I called Waiting. It's a dark black and white photograph of the house of Abdul Baha and the Mediterranean Sea, because Bahia Hanum looked at that sea every day, hoping to see the yacht. On the 30th of March, 1930, finally, Queen Marie's ship docked in Haifa. The Greatest Holy Leaf waited hour after hour in the master's home to receive Queen Marie and Princess Ileana. And even Shoghi Effendi had hoped the visit and the Queen's pilgrimage would take place. But time passed and no news came. In her diary, Queen Marie sheds light on what happened. She had docked in Haifa on the early morning of March 30th. Then the party had been met at the ship and informed her visit was politically impossible. She was spirited away in a car and driven to Syria. She was as heartbroken as Shoghi Effendi and the Greatest Holy Leaf. She even said, "Both Ileana and I were cruelly disappointed at having been prevented going to the holy shrines and of meeting Shoghi Effendi. But at the time, we were going through a cruel crisis, and every movement I made was being turned against me and being politically exploited in an unkind way. It caused me a great deal of suffering and curtailed my liberty most unkindly." Of course, Shoghi Effendi did not just write letters. He translated all of the main holy writings for us, except for the Kitáb-i-Iqán. His number one priority was the Kitáb-i-Iqán, the Book of Certitude. This extraordinary illuminated page of the Kitáb-i-Iqán is the opening page from a manuscript dated 1871, 10 years after Baha'u'lláh revealed it. In early 1930, the Guardian embarked on his first major ambitious translation of the Kitáb-i-Iqán. He called the Kitáb-i-Iqán the foremost among the priceless treasures cast forth from the billowing ocean of Baha'u'llah's revelation. He later described the book as a model of Persian prose, a style at once original, chaste, and vigorous, remarkably lucid, both cogent in argument and matchless in its irresistible eloquence. The Kitáb-i-Iqán is Baha'u'llah's greatest treatise on the station, the mission, and the role of manifestations of God. And it would be useful to both Muslims in the 20th century, to Christians in the 20th century, as it had been to Muslims in the 19th century, but it just needed to be translated into English to have that effect. So, 1929 until May 1930, the Guardian's translation of the Kitáb-i-Iqán. This is another manuscript of the Kitáb-i-Iqán from the British Library, the first 2 pages of the Kitáb-i-Iqán. It's believed that Shoghi Effendi began translating it in 1929 because by January 1930, he had finished the first pages and sent them to George Townsend, his literary collaborator in Ireland, whom he tasked with Englishing his translations. Shoghi Effendi in his translation had included words in parentheses and had asked George Townsend to choose between them. The Guardian's translations was a marvel of meticulous attention paid to every single word. So Shoghi Effendi wrote a letter to George Townsend, and listen to how careful he is about this single word. The Guardian would like to draw your attention to the word tribulation on page 9. Baha'u'lláh is quoting the famous words of Jesus recorded in Matthew chapter 24, verses 29 to 31, immediately after the tribulation of those days. The authorized version reads tribulation, whereas the Arabic from which Baha'u'lláh is quoting gives the word narrowness. As there is a difference, Shoghi Effendi would like you to please find out what the original Greek or Hebrew is of that Bible verse. If you think proper, he would recommend an alteration. George Townsend's response to the Guardian's request was equally meticulous. It turned out that the original Greek word used for tribulation was the Greek word thlipsis, which means both pressure and oppression or affliction. So when the Guardian received that information about the original Greek of the Bible verse of Matthew 24:29, Shoghi Effendi changed the original word of tribulation in his own translation and used the Greek root of the biblical word oppression. And the text now reads, immediately after the oppression of those days shall the sun be darkened. That's phenomenal. That's so amazing. The Guardian went to the Greek word of the original Matthew 24:29 in order to translate words of Baha'u'lláh that had to do with loosely quoting that verse in the Bible. Kitáb-i-Iqán is a work of unsurpassed beauty in the original Persian, but you know what? It is a work of unsurpassed beauty in English. This is just a beautiful passage. It's filled with peerless, exquisite sentences, but I have a particular attachment to this one sentence. And because it's my chronology, I chose to put my favorite sentence from the Kitáb-i-Iqán. It's about the power of internal and external transformation of the word of God. Behold, how notwithstanding these and similar traditions, they idly contend that the laws formerly revealed must in no wise be altered. These are the people who don't understand religion. And yet, is it not the object of every revelation to effect a transformation in the whole character of mankind, a transformation that shall manifest itself both outwardly and inwardly, that shall affect both its inner life and external conditions? For if the character of mankind be not changed, the futility of God's universal manifestation would be apparent. I challenge any lover of English to read this and think for 1 second that has been translated from Persian. It's perfect. May to December 1930, the development of national spiritual assemblies. But we're going to start with a tiny little vignette, 28th to 29th of May 1930, commemorating the ascension of Baha'u'lláh with the Guardian at Bahjí. I want to just, throughout this chronology, I'm going to try to bring you to what it was like to be with the Guardian, you know, and this is what it was like to be with the Guardian on a holy day, on a sad holy day, on a commemoration of an ascension. It's just, I want you to feel the atmosphere of that holy day. I want you to feel what it was like to be with the Guardian and commemorate the ascension of Baha'u'lláh with the Guardian. There were so many pilgrims present on the 28th of May, 1930, that the Baha'is had to take turns entering the shrine. The outer chamber of the shrine was brilliantly illumined, and its large cut glass chandeliers were sparkling with the flames of countless candles, shedding their flickering light on the delicate rug and the velvet drapes. The blue sky could still a little bit visible through the window panes and the glass windows at the top of the shrine's outer chamber, and their electric lamp brought out the relief and the texture of all the different plants that were in the inner chamber. The Guardian entered first, knelt before the whole inner shrine, and retreated to the outer chamber after a few seconds. The Baha'is, paying their respect at the holy threshold, moved silently and reverently in an atmosphere devoid of somberness, but filled with a regenerating spirit. Some of the Baha'is present on this day had actually been alive at the time of Baha'u'lláh, had entered his presence, had gazed on his face, and they wept with their own personal memories silently, filling the shrine with their sense of loss and inexpressible longing. One by one, the believers knelt in silent reverence at the holy threshold of the inner shrine, directly above the vault in which the blessed sacred remains of Baha'u'lláh had been laid to rest. The Holy of Holies was adorned with soft green velvet draperies and exquisite Persian rugs, beautiful urns overflowing with flowers, shedding their radiance through the entire inner shrine, which was delicately lit by a lamp and a candelabra. After the believers had paid their respects, the Guardian himself chanted the tablet of visitation, and the Baha'is exited the shrine, resuming their devotions in the Haram-i Aqdas, the area around the most holy shrine. The beautiful garden. Throughout the night, Baha'is entered the shrine to pay their respects and leave and make room for the next group of friends. At 3 a.m, the Guardian again entered the shrine and chanted the tablet of visitation again, his sweet, melodious voice penetrating the hearts of all those who were present. When the last of the Baha'is exited the shrine of Baha'u'lláh, the first streaks of dawn were lighting the sky, and the first sound they heard was the song of a bird. An hour later, at 4 a.m, the Baha'is began their journey back to Haifa. 1930, the development of the administrative order. This is a little collage that I had fun making. of the different national conventions of the United States. The first in 1909, the fifth in 1913, the 11th in 1919, the 36th in 1944, and the 103rd in 2011. One of the Guardian's strongest characteristics was his genius for organizing. And Rahia Hanoum, when she was thinking about this, she estimated that this quality was divinely created in him to fulfill the needs of the formative age of the faith and the development of the administrative order, that perfect organizational leadership skill that he had, kind of like a general. He devised a uniform system of national and local spiritual assemblies throughout the entire world. And like a true statesman, the Guardian would never cease to explain throughout his ministry that the Baha'i administrative order was unique in religious history, that it was different from any other type of religious administration, and that it would eventually incarnate, safeguard, and foster the spirit of this invincible faith and become a world commonwealth. The work that he did with the Baha'i administrative order would define the next 30 years of his guardianship. And in 1930, we start to see the development of local and spiritual national assemblies. By 1930, there were 9 national spiritual assemblies in the Caucasus, Persia, Turkestan, Egypt, Great Britain, Germany, India, Burma, Iraq, and the United States and Canada. The personal attention of the Guardian to the development of this administrative order, his personal encouragement to every single place that were holding national conventions, and even electing local spiritual assemblies at Rizwan on April 21st, he always couched it in terms of a sort of balm to the confusion and gross materialism in which mankind is sunk, that is, drifting further and further from the spirit of the divine teachings, and that the administrative order was this sort of like safe haven, protective environment, place where the Baha'is could be safe. And he created movement in every part of the globe, constantly encouraging and fostering and systematically calling attention to the proper titles of administrative bodies, to the uniformity of Baha'i elections, to the date at which they should be held. And he pursued this task for 36 years, never flagging, never failing, always there, always encouraging, always paying attention, always reading the minutes. It was a constant, the work of a gardener to keep his garden flourishing, in a sense. But he also trained local spiritual assemblies and committees in providing accurate reporting, and in doing so, teaching Baha'is to be administrators. This is an area where the Guardian was very loving and patient, and where he trained Baha'is consistently and constantly. For example, in 1923, this is how the Guardian explained to the National Spiritual Assembly of Germany and Austria the type of information that he required from them, both in content and in regularity. I am so desirous to receive from the National Spiritual Assembly frequent, comprehensive, up-to-date reports on the present position of the faith throughout Germany, with an account of the activities of the various Baha'i centers recently established through that land. Not only that, Shoghi Effendi unflaggingly encouraged local publications. You know by now how much he loved the Baha'i world, but he was equally passionate about publishing, for example, here, publications in England, in French, in Italian, in Dutch, in Danish, in Swedish, in Portuguese, in Albanian, in Esperanto, in Russian, in German, in Oriental languages, Persian, Urdu, Arabic, Turkish, Burmese, Chinese, Hebrew, Tatar, Gujarati, Japanese, Armenian, and Tamil. Literature in Braille. This took up a tremendous amount of the Guardian's time, and he was very very passionate about it, because if you don't have local language literature to share, you cannot spread the faith to the people that speak it. This is a little sweet vignette about how the Guardian received letters. 7 December 1930. I love this picture of Shoghi Effendi. The Guardian's incoming mail was an avalanche that grew steadily over the 36 years of his ministry. No matter the volume of mail, it was Shoghi Effendi's practice to open all of the letters himself. In the event that the contents were confidential, his eyes should be the only ones to first see a letter when it was opened. Once the mail was opened, and once he had taken the confidential items aside, whether the letter was in English or Persian, the Guardian made a decision. Either he answered it personally himself, or he referred it to his English or Persian secretary. And he always added a personal handwritten postscript if the secretary wrote the letter. So when he decided that the letter should be written by a secretary, what the Guardian did was that he gave his assistant copious notes on the basis of which they would prepare a draft. And then they would submit the draft back to Shoghi Effendi, who would then approve it, they would type it, and he would add his postscript. In the majority of the cases, the secretary's draft was approved. And in addition to the postscript, it was also the Guardian's practice to always add a closing phrase to the letter, after which he would simply sign Shoghi. So some of these closing phrases were at the beginning of his, before he settled to the final version, okay? These are some of the options that he had in the early years of his guardianship. He would say, your sincere co-worker in the cause, your brother and co-worker in the cause, your brother and co-worker. I am, as ever, your brother in his service. I am your devoted brother. I am your brother and fellow worker. I am your brother in his service. I am your brother and co-worker. Your brother. And then Mr. Ali Naqshbandi, the expert in all of Shoghi Effendi's letters, writings, and translations, and the only source I consulted to write every single thing about the Guardian's letters and translations, Mr. Ali Naqshbandi remarks that these phrases coalesced towards the end of the year 1923 to the phrase we are now most familiar with, your true brother. Mr. Naqshbandi also explains that when the recipient, an institution or an individual Baha'i, had accomplished something very noteworthy and admirable that called for special appreciation, the Guardian would sometimes switch your true brother with your true and grateful brother. Shoghi Effendi was transparent about everything having to do with Bahá'í administration. And he once received a letter from a New York Baha'i, Marion Little, who wanted to know how he received mail. And this is what Shoghi Effendi said. Concerning letters from Haifa, whatever letters are sent in my behalf from Haifa are all read and approved by me before mailing. There is no exception whatever to this rule. One of my pet peeves is when people ask me if there is a difference between letters written by Shoghi Effendi's secretary and by Shoghi Effendi. The answer is there is no exception to this rule. He read every single letter that his secretary sent. He wrote a postscript on them. These are to be considered Shoghi Effendi's letters. It sets the matter to rest. 1930 and 1931, the importance of Shoghi Effendi's retreats to Switzerland. Shoghi Effendi did not travel to Switzerland in 1929 because he traveled to England and back. So we think he did not travel, but some people think he might have traveled to Switzerland. Anyway, we're not really sure. But Although we have no records of Shoghi Effendi traveling to Switzerland in 1930 and 1931, it's most likely that he did. We know that during one or two of those summers early in his ministry, he bought himself a bicycle in Switzerland and cycled and rode over mountain passes. Because Shoghi Effendi's 1932 summer stay in Interlaken, a very beautiful city in Switzerland, was overshadowed by the passing of the Greatest Holy Leaf, this section is an homage to how much his respites in Switzerland meant to the Guardian. This is a photograph of Shoghi Effendi right here, climbing a very, very steep peak with mountaineers, with ropes, and those shoes that have, I don't know the term, spikes. I'm going to go with spikes. Ruhiya Khanum came to believe, thinking about the Guardian in Switzerland, that his deep love of natural scenery, inherited from Baha'u'lláh and Abdul Baha, brought him to this landscape that became his second home. She believed that Shoghi Effendi's exhausting and relentless hikes somehow healed, to whatever extent they could, the deep and painful wounds that scarred his heart from having lost Abdul Baha, whom he worshipped. Shoghi Effendi observed a type of very strict fast during these intense summer mountain marathons. He would never eat anything until he returned home at night and sat himself in the restaurant in his small hotel, where he ordered sautéed potatoes, fried eggs, and a salad, fall into bed into his tiny room, utterly spent. Waking in the middle of the night, Shoghi Effendi would drink a pitcher of cold mountain water, then return to his bed until he awoke before dawn, and as Ruhiya Khanum, quote, driven by his terrible soul restlessness, he arose and set out again. Shoghi Effendi wrote that in the early years of his guardianship, Shoghi Effendi was not only at his most distressed, but he was also hardest on himself. February to July 1931, Palestine branches of National Spiritual Assemblies. 17 February to 1 April 1931, Marian Jack's second pilgrimage. Marian Jack was a painter. You see her here painting in London. And the Guardian gave advice to Marian Jack during her pilgrimage. He asked her to visit Louis Gregory and his wife, and he also asked her to visit pioneers in Sofia, Bulgaria. She was 65 at the time, and she had a heart condition, but she went to Bulgaria and she stayed there for the rest of her life, with some absences. The Guardian was very attached to Bulgaria because it was so close to where Baha'u'lláh had spent 5 years in Edirne in the Ottoman Empire. And he associated Bulgaria very closely to Baha'u'llah's presence, because in the 19th century, the province of Turkey where Baha'u'lláh has been exiled was called Rumelia, and it was actually today's Bulgaria. So she always refused to leave her pioneering post after that. Adasiye was a big deal in the chronology of the life of Abdul Baha, because Adasiye was one of these Baha'i villages, and Abdul Baha got so much grain from these villages during the First World War to feed hungry people. It was during the ministry of Shoghi Effendi that the Baha'is of Adasiye got a local center. When Shoghi Effendi was in Adasiye, he asked them to show him where Abdul Baha had indicated the spot. So the Baha'is showed the spot to the Guardian, and the Guardian told them to take 95 steps from the border of the cemetery in the direction that Abdul Baha had indicated. And that was where they should build their local center. And so in 1931, they finished building their local center. And this is what it looked like. And you see Baha'is of Adasi in the 1930s. The village of Abdul Baha, the village he loved so much and visited so much. This is a very exciting, very short story. In March 1931, Shoghi Effendi discovered the original tablets of the Bab to the Letters of the Living. And I've put them all here, 18 of them. The only one I haven't included is the one to Baha'u'lláh. These are the tablets to the 18 Letters of the Living. A Persian believer came in March 1931 with these originals. And it was the plan of Shoghi Effendi as he was beginning to work on the Dawnbreakers, which is the subject of next week's talk, that he was going to put very high quality facsimiles of these priceless tablets in the book, The Dawnbreakers. And we will continue this story next week. So another thing that happened in 1931 is that Shoghi Effendi found a way to create Palestine branches of national spiritual assemblies. Here you have on the left the Palestine branch of the National Spiritual Assembly of the Bahá'ís of the United States and Canada in 1932. And on the right is the Certificate of Incorporation of the Palestine branch of the National Spiritual Assembly of the Bahá'ís of India and Burma. What this does is kind of twofold. It allows national spiritual assemblies outside of Palestine to own land in the name of the faith and become trustees. And in accordance with the law of the country, they can administer the property as agents of those national spiritual assemblies. And it also gives the faith a very international character. And these Palestine branches are going to become more and more important. As national assemblies are formed, we're going to see more and more of these types of institutions being created at the World Center. This is part of the Guardian's development of the Baha'i World Center in an official capacity. Now the story of the Mansion of Bahjí. November 1929, July 1931, the story of the Mansion of Bahjí. Between the 29th of May, 1892, and the 27th of September, 1929, the Mansion of Bahjí fell into absolute ruin. The covenant breakers occupied it. The last time the Greatest Holy Leaf was ever able to step foot on it was the day before Baha'u'lláh died, when he bid farewell to his own family. So she spent 40 years never being able to see the place where her father had been so happy and spent the last few years of his life. When the Guardian obtained the keys to the mansion of Bahjí on the 27th of November, 1929, the only thing the covenant breakers left in the mansion of Bahjí was a single candlestick in the room of Baha'u'lláh. Bahí Khanum called over Yadullah Tabrizi when they first got the keys. Shoghi Effendi was out of the country when they got the keys. So Ria Khanum handled it. She called over the gardener and she said, water the trees well so that they become verdant by the time Shoghi Effendi returns. So what had happened was not just a neglect of the building, it was neglect of absolutely everything. Everything was sand, the trees were dead. It was just an absolute disaster. I mean, if you imagine the spiritual death of covenant breakers, and then you imagine these spiritually dead, despicable human beings occupying a building for 37 years, just imagine to yourself the ruin that it fell under. So immediately after they were gone, and after he had received the keys, and the Mansion of Bahjí was now in the hands of the faith, the Guardian went like a general. He planted tangerine trees and araucaria, large, straight as an arrow, horizontal, spreading branches. He planted cypresses and orange trees. The remainder of the land was a sea of sand. It was dotted in place by sand dunes. There was a deep, deep hole 130 meters away from the shrine of Baha'u'lláh. So he had to fill it. He had to arrange it. He had to make sure the ground was level. And he began decorating. So he looked after the outside and he began decorating the inside. I want to tell you a little bit of a personal story. You see these friezes here? The brother of my grandfather, my My family is all artists on my father's side, and his father was a phenomenal artist. He designed the resting place for Lua Getzinger and Mirza Abul Fazl. But his brother was also a well-known painter. And the Guardian asked my great uncle to come to Haifa around this time and repaint all of these and renovate them. Of course, they've been redone since then, but my great-grandfather, my great uncle did that. So I had to mention that. So the Guardian applied his absolutely legendary ingenuity to decorate the holy places. Over the years, he had amassed a beautiful collection of antiques and gifts. And after purchasing the items, he had this creative genius for decoration and design that blended East and West, Japanese and Chinese and Western and classical and Louis XVI and cloisonné and Persian carpets and all these different things. And it just creates like a Baha'i aesthetic, something you're not going to see anywhere else because it was really from Shoghi Effendi's just genius. So he added Japanese sculptures and Chinese lacquer cabinets. And technically and artistically, the way the Guardian combined so many different styles, technically it shouldn't have worked, but it did. Not only did it work, but it looked stupendous. And it allowed him to decorate on a budget. Now, I don't want to talk anymore about covenant breakers. I'm tired of it. Ruth White continues to challenge the originality of the will. She hires a criminologist who doesn't know what he's talking about, and the whole thing is a disaster. Now, the Guardian restores the Mansion of Bahjí. The Mansion of Bahjí was completely restored. The Guardian fixed the roof, the walls, the floor, the woodwork, the frescoes, the balcony, the stencil decorations of the walls of the room, with my great uncle, the upper floor, the fine wood beams. Then, after all of those individual things were fixed and repaired and restored, he elegantly decorated the mansion. He spread out valuable Persian rugs, rare illuminations were hung. He placed priceless relics throughout the mansion, countless photographs, important Baha'i historical documents, 5,000 volumes of Baha'i literature, and then he electrified the Mansion of Bahjí, and then he invited the British High Commissioner to visit the mansion and understand that this was not a house, this was a place of pilgrimage, and he had the statute of the mansion converted from a private residence to a center of pilgrimage. He did all of this in 18 months, and then he did the best thing in the entire world. He gave it all as a gift to the greatest holy leaf. She was the first person to see it. At long last, the Arabic inscription Udi Khamar had placed in 1870, engraved on a marble tablet above the door of the Mansion of Bahjí, was again prophetic after 37 years of stain by the covenant breakers. The inscription in Arabic read, "Greetings and salutations rest upon this mansion, which increaseth in splendor through the passage of time. Manifold wonders and marvels are found therein, and pens are baffled in attempting to describe them." When his restoration of the mansion was complete, the beloved Guardian arranged an elaborate surprise for the greatest holy leaf. A car brought the greatest holy leaf from Haifa to Bahjí with 3 people. When they arrived, the big southern entrance door was opened, and she stepped out of the car into the courtyard of the mansion. Imagine the emotion of the greatest holy leaf. For the first time in 40 years, she's going to get to see her beloved saintly father's last home. She was 85 years old, and she was much too weak to climb the stairs. So what the Guardian arranged was a large chair that was brought by Yadullah Tabrizi, the very strong garter, and another very strong man. And the greatest holy leaf sat on the large chair, and they carried her up the stairs like a queen. They placed the chair down in the central hall of the mansion, As soon as the greatest holy leaf got up from her chair, she exclaimed, weeping loudly and laughing simultaneously, "Oh, Baha'u'lláh, the guardian of your cause has repaired, furnished, and decorated your blessed mansion. Oh, Abdul Baha, what a wonderful guardian you have chosen for the cause of God. He has restored the glory of the blessed mansion." The greatest holy leaf asked to see Baha'u'llah's bedroom, the room in which he had passed away. The greatest holy leaf, how thoughtful, had prepared boxes of baklava, a very sweet, nutty, layered, flaky dessert filled with sugar, popular in the Middle East, for all of the Baha'is that day, and the visitors, Baha'i and non-Baha'i, who were coming to the mansion the next day. Bahí Hanum spent 6 very happy days around the Mansion of Bahjí and the Shrine of Baha'u'lláh. She spent 1 night in the mansion and the other 5 in the pilgrim house. This is the last section for today, Shoghi Effendi's personality. There are a lot of stories. You're going to miss out on most of them. Please go to the chronology and read them. These are very important sections to get to know the guardian intimately. I promise you, I will pick the gold. I will tell you the most wonderful parts of it. I'm trying to finish very quickly here. Yeah, I really want to talk to you about this. The guardian's physical appearance. I think it's important that we just kind of picture him very clearly in our minds. The guardian was short in stature. He had very dark hair. And towards the end of his ministry, his hair started graying on the sides. He had an olive complexion, and his eyes were described from many pilgrims to be of many different colors, dark brown, blue, gray. But Ruhiya Khanum said that he had immense eyes, and she described them of that deceptive hazel color that sometimes led people who did not have the opportunity to look into them as often as I did to think they were brown or blue. The truth is they were a clear hazel, which sometimes changed to a warm and luminous gray. The guardian had very fine, very symmetrical figures, and he was clean shaven except for a small dark mustache. He exuded energy even when he was at rest. And he had a strong body. And when he hugged the pilgrims, they could feel his strength. He had very beautiful, small, slender hands, shapely and expressive, which the greatest holy leaf said were exactly like the hands of her father, Baha'u'lláh. There was always an air of grace about the guardian. All his gestures were graceful. He often wore a rust-colored coat. He always wore a tie, sometimes black, sometimes brown, but he always wore his distinctive black fez and a gold Baha'i ring on the 2nd finger of his right hand. This is something extremely important. People don't realize how active and energetic the guardian was. Shoghi Effendi's irrepressible energy. In a private diary excerpt, Ruhiya Khanum describes the resistless, unstoppable, formidable temperament of Shoghi Effendi, comparing his energy, his persistence, his drive to something utterly irresistible. Temperamentally, Shoghi Effendi is a doer, a builder, an organizer, and loathes abstractions. No one observing Shoghi Effendi could doubt for a moment that he was not perfectly equipped for this phase of the cause, and I believe he was created for it to just do what he is doing. He is the most extraordinarily unidirectional person I have ever seen. His whole nature and tastes and likes and dislikes are intense. He is like someone traveling at high speed in one direction, which gives him an almost infinite driving power. His persistence is irresistible. There is no dissipation of his forces. He only wants one thing. He wants it passionately, immediately, completely, perfectly, the temple built, or a flight of steps here in the garden. He descends on it like a hurricane and never lets up until it is done. He drives ahead. It is extraordinary. There are many, 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 many more stories about the Guardian's personality. I am begging you to go to the chronology and read them. Next week is part 9, The Dawnbreakers. It's going to be very exciting. See you there. Same bat time, same bat channel. I love you all, and thank you very much.